Hey everyone, welcome to REI Behind the Scenes. Today we're having Andrew on, and he's going to be talking to us about his project that he finished. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun because we basically go through what the project was, then we go through the numbers, and after the numbers we'll talk about the problems that were encountered on the project and any learning experiences that were encountered. And then in the end, we finish off with some tips for the viewers. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And I can see that Andrew's here. So I'm just going to send a request. Or I think yeah, there we go. Should be coming on. And just to remind you guys, I'm having my networking event. Hey, I just want to quickly let everyone know first, sorry, that I just have my networking event April 29th. So you guys all want to be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. The speaking segment is going to be about mindset and performance. So I think you guys will enjoy. And then afterwards, you get an hour to just chit chat, one-on-one conversations with your peers and some experts. So you guys want to be there. But getting on to Andrew, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, it's good. I can hear you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on with you again.
Yeah, I feel like last time we had such a good conversation. It was a lot of fun. So I know this one will also be a lot of fun.
Hopefully I can deliver. Oh, sorry, that's a cattail.
I know I have Rusty outside because I notice he knows when I'm online and he tries to be like bothering me or like getting my attention. So so he's outside right now.
I should have done the same, but sorry about that.
No worries. I totally know how you feel. It's like they know, right? They just know. It's like, oh, you're not giving me attention. You know what? I need it right now.
Yeah, and you know what? This is real life right now, right? Where you have distractions around you while you're working from home.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So thanks for coming on. I think it's going to be fun. So we're going to hear about your project. And so let's start with just giving a little summary of what your project, like what it was. I think you bought it as a student rental, right?
Yeah, I bought I got a good deal on the property. It kind of came across my desk as a pocket listing, and it was in Old Sandwich Town, actually on Sandwich Street, and I couldn't really say no because it was an 8-bedroom, and I think it was 248. Anyway, we'll get to the numbers in a minute. But it was 248 and 8 bedrooms. I did the quick math and I'm like, holy crap, that's a 1% rule in Windsor. Like, you don't see that much anymore, or if at all. So I jumped at it, and I bought it, and I might be mistaking this, but I bought it in, it was like May or June of 2020 and I actually intentionally made the closing 60 days away because I was finishing up a project. So we closed in August, and I thought that, oh, January, plenty of time, we'll be right in time for the new session. So that was the intention. And from that perspective, as a student rental, it was going to be a gold mine. So I got really excited about it.
And so this property, at the beginning, were you planning to do a lot of renovations, or what were the type of renovations you were expecting to do for this project?
So the big thing on this one, it was a little bit of a divergence from what I would normally take on, in that it was pretty much done. Like it was painted, although poorly, and had 2 bathrooms already. It had all of the rooms segregated. Like there was actually some rooms that it was a big room that they had split. So like a lot of the heavy lifting was done already as far as the layout. So one of the biggest obstacles for this property is that the floors were really wonky. And my realtor who brought it to my attention, he referred to it as like a fun house. Like one floor goes this way, one goes this way, one goes this way type of thing. By the time I actually saw it, which was a while later, I totally agreed with what he said. It was a really strange situation. So anyway, it was leveling the floors and making everything all one level throughout the main floor. For some reason, the second floor was perfectly fine, which was even stranger. And then there was some concern about the foundation, and we were just going to repair the foundation. I knew that it was a crawl space, so it wasn't like we were going to have to waterproof and dig up things and everything. It was more just fixing block, which I wasn't scared of. And I think that a lot of people just didn't take the time to investigate what that really meant. And in my case, I had my contractors go out in my absence, just take a look and say, like, what's the severity of this? Is this a patch, or is this like a dig up, So it was mostly fixing those two main things that were stopping a lot of other people that still had, it wasn't like just me having access to this. There was a few other people, and that was the primary thing scaring them away. So I had I was either too stupid to be afraid of it, or I had enough knowledge not to be afraid of it.
Okay, so you weren't expecting a major renovation, and that's why I guess you thought, like, for sure, no problem. By January, you'll have all your tenants in and ready for the new semester or the next semester.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And okay, so then now that we have a picture of what the house is and what you were planning to do, let's run the numbers. So what did your numbers look like? So you told us already your purchase price.
Yeah, so $248 for an 8-bedroom, 2-bathroom in the student area. Of course, closing costs, and I wrote down $5,000, and I'm not really sure why it was so high, but I think I was throwing in some other administrative costs and stuff like that.
Did you have private financing?
I did, yeah.
There was probably why.
Well, but the financer I use doesn't have points. There's no upfront fees, so I think it was just a matter of
the lawyer is expensive.
Miscellaneous costs. I mean, usually it's like $1,200 plus title insurance. I think I ended up paying out all the taxes on the property just to make it easier, whatever, and a few things like that. So it added up a little bit there.
Okay.
Carrying costs was the big one. Carrying costs ended up being $18,000, which was a big hit. And
how many months was that?
Well, it was from August until last month, actually.
Oh, this is recently that you sold.
Pretty long time. Yeah, was that like 8 months? Yeah. Or what did I say, 18,000? So it was 9 months. It's 2,000 a month was the payments. So the reno was only 31,000. And I'll get into where that money was spent if you'd like. On some here. The closing was more reasonable, like $2,000, right? So a standard closing costs. And then the realtor's commission was $15,000. So we're all in for, well, I didn't actually add all that up, but anyway, we sold it for $335, and so the profit was $16,000. Now I will say that it was a little touch and go for a while because we had this, it's a strange story. We had this on the MLS and we couldn't get any bites. And I guess at the time, that was when we started to see that there was more people selling student rentals than buying them. So this was on the higher side, and the reason that I ultimately ended up selling it was that it's too many bedrooms for the time. Like in peak time, 8 bedrooms is a gold mine, but you could rent a 3-bedroom house to whomever the students that are still existing, but to get all 8 rooms rented is probably impossible at this juncture. I mean, maybe now, but not then. So anyway, I ended up scraping out about $16,000 in profit.
So that's because initially you weren't planning to sell, right? You were planning to keep this property. That was your initial plan, and you had to pivot and sell it because of specific conditions.
Yeah, well, so what ended up happening is once we got a feel for the fact that this was going to stick around. I think at the time I was still in denial that, COVID had an end date. And as some more time went on, and I was watching the University of Windsor website, and they pretty much committed to the whole year. Like at some point, the institutions need to say, like, we either do or don't. So regardless of if we're able to come back to school in the mid-year, we need to plan our staffing and our procedures and everything. So they just said the whole rest of the year, we're not doing it. So I said, okay, well, at that point is when I started to say, like, maybe this is really going to go on for longer. So my investor, this was partially purchased with, like, down payment was with my partner. I did the renovations, and then the money was private for the mortgage, for the bulk of it. So he kind of didn't want anything to do with it. I started to not really want anything to do with it. And so the funny thing is I'm not a student rental investor. Oh. I was just trying different things in 2020, seeing what worked. And I guess I was just ignorant to the fact that student rentals wasn't something that I should be getting into at this point. But like I said, I thought it was going to end. So yeah, we ended up pivoting. And at that point, we were still under renovation. And that's when we told the contractors, had a chat with the team and said, okay, now we're doing bare bones. We're not, keep in mind, we are not keeping this. So don't be suggesting features. Don't be, putting in luxury items, whatever. Like, this is going to stay. So we kind of changed our tune and forged ahead a little bit quicker than we might sort of normally have. And yeah, that actually brings me, if I'll just jump in there, is when something goes bad and everything starts to trickle around it, the contractors, remember I said there was like a 60-day close. They were finishing up at another property, and their, like, carpenters and finishers were still at the other property, which of course that property was delayed by a few weeks. So that made everything worse. So my house actually sat vacant for a month, and I paid interest on a loan for a month. They were just sat vacant. So poor planning on my part, but sometimes you need to just get the deal, right? So, So they started to, once they freed up some of their less specific staff, they went over and they started working on the outside of the house. So they started fixing up the garage and fixing the door and pulling out some old stumps and this and that, and tearing down this dilapidated shed that was in the corner and stuff. So they just, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, well, that all has to be done. So they started going on it. Anyway, I wasn't watching what they were actually doing, and they spent another $3,000 of my money just fixing up the yard. And now I'm like, I'm getting rid of it. I'm like, no, like, you just blew through this amount of money. That was right at the time when I was switching from keeping it to selling it, and they had already done that work. And I was like, shit. So,
you're like, why did you do this?
Yeah. But I mean, it's a lesson to maybe monitor what they're doing a little bit more carefully, or to what extent they're doing. I didn't realize they were pulling down trees and this and that. But it's also just kind of, it is what it is, because right, you can never be perfect, right? And I pivoted right at a certain time where that money had already been spent, and it's like,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And like you said, your plan was initially to keep it and rent it as a student rental. And so I feel like that will probably happen to a lot of people if we do have a pivot, because let's say a market changes and we have to pivot. I feel like you will always have some little bits of money that get lost, because like you said, when you're pivoting, you're also changing strategies. With changing strategies, you may be just, the costs will be different to what you initially want, like the repairs or whatever you wanted to get done may not be needed anymore because now you're doing something different. So I feel like that probably will, if anything, I feel like that would probably always happen, because like, I feel like that is a pivot, right? You're pivoting, and normally it's for a specific reason. Like you said, like the economy has changed, and, now I'm not keeping it. Now, now it's changing the mentality of like, what do I need to do just to sell it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can't beat yourself up. Hindsight's 2020, right? So I mean, let's just say you put in luxury vinyl plank, and then you decided it was going to be a flip, and you could have got away with a lesser quality flooring or even laminate. But I mean, it's already installed. What are you going to do, right? Exactly.
Yeah, totally agree. So what other things did you have that, or let's start with, so what problems, what was the biggest problem that you had on this property?
The biggest, well, I mean, the biggest was the fact that I had to get rid of it. I just made some notes here. I think it was a bunch of small things collectively. I wouldn't say necessarily they're all specifically problems, but problems depending on, you know, as we've said, the mentality that I went into this was to fix the house up to keep it. So I bought a house with foundation issues. If I was intending to flip it in the first place, I wouldn't have bought a house with foundation issues or flooring issues, because, you know, it's like buying a house that has knob and tube, wonky floors, the panel needs to be upgraded, things like that. You're going to spend $10,000 and nobody's even going to know you did it. So for a flip scenario, that doesn't make any sense at all. I have heard of certain situations where you might just go in and sort of hotel, in a sense, where you might fix a problem with a house that is preventing it from being sold to somebody else. So if you have a specific niche in foundations, you have a waterproofing company that's really good and inexpensive, you may react to it differently. But for me, I'm going to, in the future, I think I'm just going to stay away from foundation ones, because it locks me into sort of a more longer term hold, because that money is going to be lost unless I can amortize it over, you know, a decade or whatever. The one thing that I've gotten used to too in my area, and I know that I've seen people post problems in different areas around the province, but it's crime. So this particular house was broken into 3 times. And actually the funniest of them was when my contractor showed up in the morning to do work, and there was a lady on the front porch claiming this was her house.
What? Oh, really? Oh
And
my God.
they actually had to call the police to remove her. And she was telling the police too that this was her house.
Oh my God, did that give you problems? Like, because then
No,
you have to show papers, or I guess she would have to show the papers, right, to prove it if it were her house?
no. I mean, so the funny thing is that, like, the police knew who she was.
Oh, okay. So it's
Um,
normal. They're like, she's the huge.
yeah, that's Barb. We'll take her away. She'll probably be back. So just call us again or whatever.
That's
But like,
hilarious.
one of the break-ins, they actually broke a window to get in. And we just didn't bother fixing it until everything was over. So I had cameras up. I actually buy fake cameras just for a deterrent. And I had beware of dog signs, and I had property under surveillance signs, and none of that seemed to work. So when a property's vacant, I think that the shadows know, you know. So we might drive by it and never realize, but there's people lurking in the bushes, kind of thing, watching. So that was a bit of an issue to contend with, just because it added $500. It wasn't a big deal, window installed, you know, but still. I mentioned about the contractor's free reign. In this particular case, again, that was more of a pivot issue, because I'd spent the money that I now didn't have to spend. I guess the biggest takeaway is being prepared for any situation, and that you're not able to control the market. Perhaps I shouldn't have bought a student rental at the time. You know, would I buy one today? I personally wouldn't. I've lost faith in the students coming back. I just don't know when that's going to be. And I don't have faith in caring. I know a lot of people still are, and that's great, because they're going to profit in the end. For me, the situation was just that our carrying costs were so expensive, and my partner and I lost the appetite, because we were basically just bleeding money.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't really want to finance it, and we just kind of decided we were done with it. So yeah, like, you know, 8 bedrooms in a declining market was an issue. There was just a lot of things all tied together. So, I mean, I guess that's the importance of having multiple exit strategies, and never really going in just with one mentality, and if this doesn't work, like you have nothing else. You know, I probably unknowingly have 3 or 4 with every property. I always run the numbers, even with a student rental. I don't rely on the fact that 8 bedrooms are going to be full occupancy. You know, maybe at least one of them will be vacant. But also, I run the numbers based on what if I had to carry this property with more of a traditional single family, because it is essentially a single family house that we're using for another purpose. So what's the worst case scenario? I actually have another student rental on the east side of the bridge, the east side of the university. And that property, we were able to rent out to a family. And actually, I didn't even mention that. Before we tried to sell this house, we tried to get some renters in there. And we weren't just accepting anybody. Like, we could have probably put people in there. But we were trying to make sure that we weren't then getting damage and stuff, because we were, you know, picking the lowest of the low, or the low hanging fruit. But we couldn't get any families in there, and not enough students to make it worthwhile. So that's important to remember.
So for that, so let's say, just going back to you were talking about, so have you changed the way you analyze properties because of what happened with this one? Are you like viewing things differently, or is it just more like you said, like you're not going to, let's say, purchase student rentals maybe for a while or maybe at all?
We have actually decided, my partner and I decided between us that we were going to just switch to duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. And that's going to be our multifamily model. A little more controllable in the sense of who the population is. They're not transient like students are, and they're not affected by school closures and things like that. So that's going to be our solution to that problem. And they're generally speaking a little bit less to maintain, you know, rather than students who are do more damage and stuff like that. But as far as going into the property, no, I haven't changed how I do things. It's a learning lesson to have multiple exit strategies. It's more like a reinforcement lesson than a learning one, because I always walk into everything trying to think of all the different possibilities, and I run my numbers 2 ways. Like when I analyze a property, I kind of run my property, or analyze my property, to the worst case scenario. What's the least amount of income that I could get in whatever scenario, and then does it still carry? And I've actually increased the level that I do that. So now I'm throwing a lot more stuff at my calculations, throwing in a little bit of extra legal fee, throwing in I never threw in my bookkeeping fees. I never threw in admin stuff. I never threw in miscellaneous. It was always just sort of property tax, insurance, mortgage, like the big ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've started padding that a little bit more. I guess it has opened my eyes to how important that is.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it would, like, from what would happen, it probably has changed your perspective, even like you said, and now the way you analyze the numbers, like that you're adding a little bit more padding because of what happened.
Yeah, and you know, I've talked to, just as we're talking, it's making me think that I've spoken to a lot of more newer investors in the last 6 months, and one thing they're like, oh, it's going to be this, and it's going to rent, like, we're going to rent at this, you know, student rental, for example, $500 a month. I'm like, well, what if it's not? What if it's 400? Let's even test this even more. Like, let's say it's a small room and it's 300 a month. You know, most people are going to say, no, that's never going to happen. Let's just play a game. You know, let's see how low we can go before it's not a deal, and then decide the possibility of that happening, right?
100%. I completely agree. I think that is something that happens a lot. Even, for example, with the renovation budget. Oh, I can do the whole thing for 50K, no issue. And especially coming from my background, like my husband doing renovations. I mean, I think same thing, you have, you know, the background in renovations. You look at something and sometimes, like, I think that's probably not going to be 50K, and they work with like wishful numbers and thinking like, I can squeeze it in, you know, I can squeeze in this and that, no issue. And same thing with rents. Like they, for some reason, will pick the highest numbers, and you're just kind of like, everything should be conservative. Why are you being, like run both ways, like you said, right? Like I do like to run with the hopeful numbers just to see how things work, but I run with like conservative numbers to make any kind of decisions.
Yeah. No, I used to do my renovations sort of in the beginning part of last year, a little bit more napkin math. Like, oh yeah, we're going to do this thing for 50 grand. And that wasn't low, but it always ends up being a little bit higher. And then I realized I would add my 10%, the rule of thumb, 10%. But what I realized is I wasn't factoring in the nitty gritty. I wasn't factoring in the clamps that hold a sink in or something. Or, I mean, they usually come with a sink, but you know what I mean? Like clamps or brackets. I didn't add up specifically what the doorknobs, the counter pulls and stuff like that were going to be.
The detail. The
yeah,
detail
the toilet.
so much. Because like that's the same
Paper
thing. It's
holder.
really funny. People don't think of like, even let's say putting the baseboards in, like how much it costs to add the baseboards in and the work involved. Like the details are usually the most expensive things, because labor wise, you want to really, make sure it looks nice, like you've done it properly. Whereas like let's say you lay down floor, like if you lay down the floor, it's very quick, but now once you're hitting the walls, you're like making sure you do the cuts properly, so your baseboards are like covering, so you're not seeing any like weird, spaces in, between your flooring and your, like, it's funny, people think like things are so fast because, for example, like, oh, you lay down the floor is super quick, but the thing is you lay down like the middle parts, and then once you're getting to like the walls, then it's like that's like cut, measure, whatever, and people don't realize the details are what takes the most time consuming part.
And the cost of something simple, like all of the things I said, they add up to hundreds of dollars, and a doorknob is $20. Okay, it's $20. But if you have 5 doors in your house, there's $500 in material or $100 in materials. And you bring up baseboards, even a lot of the time when you're flooring, you'll leave the baseboards, but you have to pull the cord around. And people, cord around. Cord around's cheap. Well, quarter round might be 80 cents a square foot. Let's just round it to the dollar for purposes. So a 10 by 10 room has 4 walls in it. That's 10 by 10 by 10 by 10. That's like $400 without installing it. Well, that stuff can bite you in the butt really fast,
Oh,
and to your point, going back to your point, as far as the visual effect of work being done, I had a buddy say to me, in his neighborhood, they built a house from scratch. And he's like, oh, wow, they put that thing up in like a week. You would be amazed. They're going to be done that house in a month. And I'm like, well, putting up the walls and having a roof on a house, yes, they can do that in a week. The whole rest of the inside is probably going to take 6 months. Like, it's appearances are deceiving. So
100%. Especially, I feel like when you're dealing with people that don't have experience with renovations, and everything looks simple to them, especially I feel like if you're dealing with a money partner, it's probably, at least this is what's happening to us, Our money partners are really funny because they're just like, oh, it's only $1,000, just add it in. Oh, it's only $1,000, only $500, it's only $200. I'm like, you know how much you've added up on extras already? And I'm like, remember, this is not your house. This is an investment property.
Yeah. Well, and curbing the, it doesn't have to be the best finishes. It doesn't have to be high end. It doesn't have to be this. It doesn't have to be that. In a lot of cases, depending on the neighborhood, good is good enough, right? Mm-hmm. Is it functional? Is it new? Is it fresh? That's all you need.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I feel like that's also something lots of even new investors have the problem of. They start picturing it as their own home, and then want to put like the best of the best, and you're just kind of like, what if they don't like that? What was the purpose of putting in? They're going to rip it out because it is something cheap. Like, oh, only $500. Like the homeowner who buys it, it's only going to cost me $500. Let me rip it out and do something that I like, you know, instead of like, why did we even put it in to begin with? Like, you know, leave it as a blank slate for them to decide like what touches they want to put into it.
Yeah, and especially, you know, when you're flipping, that's important too, because you know, nowadays realtors, there was a time when realtors would tell you when you're selling your own house to paint the whole house in a neutral color, to fix up this, to fix up that. Nowadays they're saying like, don't even bother, because everybody renovates. Everybody's going to change it. You're just wasting your money putting in a new countertop that isn't their taste, right? But you can also do that on a rental property. When I, you know, was first starting out, I put a lot more energy into design features. I was trying to make, oh, that light fixture, no, this one, no, that one. Oh, I'll spend the extra $20 for a little bit nicer one or this. And I realized at some point, I have absolutely no idea who's going to move in here. And I just need to keep everything very general, very neutral, very functional. If there's too many design elements and I'm trying to get a little too cute with stuff, I could actually be shooting myself in the foot in many cases. So
yeah, because it could actually limit some people from wanting to buy it because it might not be their style, and then now it's only people who like that specific style.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you do what kind of sorry, you were gonna say?
No, I was gonna change topics for if you have one more question you want to ask.
Okay, I was gonna change topics too. But before I change the topic, I just wanted to also understand do you do like what kind of investments do you normally get into?
I'm primarily buy and hold, primarily BRRRR. So I really like the renovation aspect. That's my niche, is that I know about renovations. So I like to do that, but I'm trying to get out of solely doing that because I'm on my own now. Like people saying retired. Well, I'm not really retired, but I don't have a job. So I'm using flips as income source to keep allowing me to buy holds.
Okay. So you're getting into flips, or you've already been doing flips just to keep you?
Well, I flipped this last one, this sandwich one.
That's true. So would that be your first flip?
I bought a couple more for this year, and I've got the closing dates staggered out, so like I don't have to touch it for another 3 months. So
was this what we're talking about? Was that technically then your first flip?
Yes, that's the first house I've ever sold, actually.
Yeah. Oh, so that's amazing. So I feel like for it being you weren't even thinking to do a flip, and you converted it to, and you had to pivot to make it a flip. You know, it turned out really well then, because I mean, it's a good way, you know, you had your learning experiences and you still made a decent profit out of it.
Yeah, well, and I look at it though, if you're primarily a BRRRR investor, every single property that I go into, I'm looking at how do I maximize rents and how do I maximize appraisals. So when you're trying to maximize an appraisal, that's basically like selling the house. So I feel like if you're 100% BRRRR and you do big BRRRRs, of course, anybody watching that doesn't know what a BRRRR is, buy, rent, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. So anybody that does that, I've done very big BRRRR. I've done $70,000, $80,000 BRRRRs. So for me to do a flip, it's just really, the only difference for me is more so the buy. I need to make sure that price is much lower than what I would accept for a BRRRR, because I know with a BRRRR, I have a lot longer horizon to recoup any costs that I might have to leave in the property. Whereas a flip, you have no window of opportunity or escape there. It's you either bought it right or you didn't. You can control a little bit with your renovations, but it's only to a certain degree, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the way I feel, is that being that I'm a primary BRRRR holder, I'm very well adapted to doing flips. If I was a turnkey rental buyer, then that would be a totally different story, right?
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. I feel like for people that, even if they don't come with any renovation background, I feel like a BRRRR is a nice way to get into if you do want to flip, because it like that, like flipping, if you don't know how to run numbers, then that could be a disaster.
Yeah.
And especially
Bur
like that,
burring,
like if you
burring
can't
is a
even
very forgiving version of flipping, right?
exactly, yeah,
Or
it's a
as
good way to
Erica
do
says, flipping to yourself, right?
it.
That's a good way of, that's an exactly good way of looking at it.
Yeah. And it's an easier way to learn because you, again, like basic, like you learn from your mistakes. And like you said, because it's being flipped back to yourself and you're just, keeping it for long term, you learn from those mistakes and you can decide, what to do next and how to change it and maybe do a few of them before you go into a flip, I feel like is always the best way.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that's prepared me for the inevitable. It's funny how I mean, this is getting a little bit into your other show, but it's like your journey, right? And you don't realize necessarily what you did. Like I've been buying BRRRRs because I like the model that I can potentially not have any money in the property. If I renovate it nice enough and I get it refinanced for full price, I just got myself a free house. So that's what attracted me to the BRRRR. But then, of course, it was also setting the stage by doing bigger and bigger and bigger renovations. Like I started at $20,000 renovations and I went all the way up to, I think it was close to 90,000 on practically rebuilt the house from the inside out. So that gave me over time more and more confidence to where flipping is not really a scary thing at this point.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, actually. That's very true. Starting with like a small flip and then kind of or even a reno, like just a reno, like a BRRRR flip, but starting with a smaller renovation and then increasing it is also definitely a great tip because it is true that if you do a big flip, that just makes it even scarier if you don't have the experience because you don't, if you don't have the experience in it, a lot of things can come up that you wouldn't know about and it could just kill your budget completely, but in a worse way. I feel like the bigger the flip or the bigger the renovation, the more that can come out of that. Whereas like if you're
Yeah.
doing like a little lipstick, paint the walls, maybe change the floor, you probably won't see like the issues as much as you would like now you're opening walls and realizing
Everything's
that your
knob and
design.
tube.
Yeah, exactly. You're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, what do I do now? Another 10 grand to the budget.
Yeah. Yeah. Those hits can hurt for sure. For sure.
So actually going back to another question, you're talking about your problem. I was wondering if we could talk more about the foundation issues. So when you bought it and you're planning to keep it, like how was the difference between, keeping it, like were you planning to keep it and not really worry about the foundation issues and that wasn't a cost? Or what was the difference between, like then flipping it when it came to the foundation issues?
Yeah, the foundation for me, it just wasn't that big of a deal.
Oh, okay.
It ended up being so. It ended up being a pretty old house, and it had a brick foundation, so it wasn't cinder block or poured concrete. So basically, on some of the corners, some of the mortar had loosened and the bricks had come out. Upon inspecting the inside, there's also lots of internal supports, and somebody had already, over time, had already installed post jacks with a concrete base to the post jacks. So the foundation issue was almost more cosmetic.
Okay.
Stick a couple bricks in, or even just stucco over the corner to prevent more water damage from degrading the mortar. We ended up skirting the entire perimeter of the house to prevent any future damage. And on the inside, we ended up putting a good dose of spray foam, not only for insulation purpose. Like we were we were considering insulating it, and it would have been a cheaper option to use, say, blanket insulation, which would have qualified for rebates and stuff the same as spray foam. But what we opted for was to do the spray foam, so it does get into all the nooks and crannies, and essentially now makes that waterproof and you know, airtight and everything. So, you know, what preserves, you put your food in you know, a freezer bag and you suck the air out of it and it preserves it like a vacuum seal or whatever. It's the same kind of thing with the foundation in that respect. So, I mean, I wasn't about to dig out the whole house and replace it with cinder block and poured concrete and stuff like that. I mean, the house has been there for 100 years. It'll be there for 100 more. And once I saw all the internal work in the crawl space with the post jacks and everything, and I mean, the beams were, you know, like the beams were like trees, like they weren't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. So it ended up being that it was actually a pretty solid foundation.
Okay. So then the foundation issue, like it was just an issue that you already knew about, but it wasn't an issue for you because you already knew like how much it was going to cost you to fix it and everything, right?
I think the big difference there is, yeah, I wasn't worried about it I mean, you're always worried about foundation. And when I hear the word foundation, if I've been in some houses where I've been in the basement and like the foundation is, you can actually see when you look down the wall that it's leaning, stuff like that. Yeah, I'll run away from. But I sent my contractors. I had the time to do that before I placed an offer even. I said, go underneath this property and tell me, like, what does this really mean? Because some people just say foundation issues because technically speaking, there was foundation issues. But you could argue that my house has foundation issues that I'm living in right now because there's various cracks and chips out of the concrete. Well, I can go and I can patch that, and then now there's not a foundation issue. So it's just to do with the severity of it. Okay. And you know, I sent the right people to inspect it before I even considered it, and I got the comfort from them to know that, yeah, it's not as bad as what you might have been imagining.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, definitely having the right team always is so important.
Well, and using them properly, right? It's like, okay, if there's a tight timeline and we can only get one visitation on a property, and I'm in Toronto and the property's in Windsor or anywhere else, if it's between me and sending my contractor, I'm like, why don't I send my contractor?
And they're the expert too, so it's like for sure they're gonna give you their expert opinion. Yeah,
yeah. And actually, for me, like I've done that before too. When I've actually paid contractors, like not these particular ones, but different ones, to go with my realtor and inspect a property. And I don't want to insult anybody here, but I think that in some of the contractors that I've sent to properties have done they look at a property more, not thoroughly, but a different way than a home inspector would. And I think depending on the type of real estate investor you are, you're expecting there to be problems. And in fact, you want there to be problems, or else there's no point in you buying it, you know, if that's the type of investor you are. So, you know, I was talking to an investor just 2 days ago who sent me an email saying, oh my gosh, the property I'm closing on next month just had a leak in the basement, and they had to tear up the carpet and do this and do that, and the paneling's a little bit damaged at the bottom. I'm like, what do you care? You're going to be turning the basement into 3 bedrooms for student rentals, you know? You would have torn that apart anyway. So like the way we look at things is a little different, right? So a contractor is a great person to go in and just say, what needs to be fixed? Because that's what I want to know. You know? Yeah,
I completely agree with that. It is very, very true. Because, yeah, it's like 2 different eyes looking at it, right? Because a contractor, because they do the work, they see things differently than, let's say, an inspector, where their kind of training is more for looking for issues that may impact. Whereas like these issues that may impact may not really also be that big of an issue, let's say to us, because we already know, like you said, we already know we're going to be like clearing the space out anyways, let's say, or opening up walls anyways. So it's for a renovator, a contractor, it's going to be a quick fix. It's not really a big deal.
Yeah. And then like if there's mold in the basement, it's like that's probably why I'm buying the property. Or if you know what I mean? Like some of the things that they're going to point out are by definition the things that make you yeah. So yeah, I think just to summarize your question, the foundation just didn't end up being as big of a deal as it may have been perceived by other buyers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just a very great point, because actually that you say that, we also do the same thing. We've never had an inspector come into the houses that we buy. And it's just my husband that goes, because we're going into properties, like you said, that we know we're having to do either like renovations, major or minor, but we know we're doing the renovations, and we know we're picking houses that need those, that an inspector will tell us, obviously, like, yeah, there's mold. We clearly know. It's like, that's why we're buying it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think my mother asked me the other day when we were walking or something, and something about the potential for knob and tube or potential for this or that. And I said, well, I'm buying in a certain neighborhood in Windsor, Ontario, the central neighborhood, which is the oldest neighborhood. Every house I buy has some form of knob and tube in it. I know this. Just depends on how rampant it is, whether or not it's live or disconnected. I mean, but I'm expecting it in every single house. So I don't need somebody to tell me that it's there when that's part of what I do.
Exactly. That's so true. And I think there was another, and for the renovations, so you had a 1-month delay, but were the renovations, the time frame, was it as you expected? Like, was it the time frame that you expected it to be?
It's kind of muddied. I just have to think about this for a second. So we blew through a month. We got 2 months. 2 months. That's 4, 5. Yeah, I pretty much factor in about 3 months for every renovation. Some of them I might expect a little bit closer to the 1.5 to 2 month if it's a lesser degree, depending on, it's not so much what is being done in a renovation as much as how much, so if it's a lot of cosmetic plus some infrastructure, then it would be more the 3 months. But if it's just, like in this case, it was just the floor and just the foundation, there wasn't really a lot of other stuff, so it actually went a little quicker. So more or less it was on schedule. Okay. I think that a lot of renovations this year, my expectation is that they should be done quicker than they actually are. I have a lot of the time, like I said, I'll allot 3 months minimum, and then I can be happy if it's done quicker. But off and on, you never know, this year, last year and this year, it's materials that's the problem.
100%.
Like, I put in kitchen cabinets and I just used the prefabricated Home Depot or Lowe's versions. And I had to get pieces from 3 different stores in order to fulfill my order. And of course, lumber, there was a period last summer where if you could find a pressure treated 2x6, you were like,
mission.
Gold. Yeah. So that's been really the issue. And that's delayed a few things, certainly, for me this year.
Mm-hmm. And so because you only really had that 1 month delay, but your renovations were, done within the time frame you expected. So because then you had a long time then in between between once the renovation's finished and closing?
That's a great question. And that's what I was going to switch to is private money and a conversation around that. I've never used private money before, not like a hard money loan. And I got a very good lesson in how expensive it really is. The lender made more money on this property than I did. So the problem is since I had not used it before, I did not factor in the closing period. So the buyer wanted 2 months. So that's $4,000 right there. We had it before Christmas. We had it listed on the MLS for 6 to 8 weeks, where I was telling you it just wasn't moving. Before that, we actually tried to rent it. So we listed it for 3 to 4 weeks there. So if you say we had a month where we were trying to rent it, 2 months while we were trying to, or actually it ended up being 3 months we were trying to sell it, and 2 months for closing, that's 5 months right there, plus the first month that it was vacant. So there's my 6 months of wasted money. Or it's not wasted because you have to expect a certain amount of that. I was anticipating that everything sells like crazy right now. There's no way I thought it would take a couple months to sell it. I hadn't really thought about the fact that I would have to pay the interest while the closing period was happening. I don't know why it didn't occur to me. It's just a dumb moment. But so yeah, I mean, you now, believe me, that's a big lesson because I plan to use a lot of private money in the future. And now you better believe I'm factoring in 2 to 3 months of, for the sale and the closing period and stuff like that. And then maybe even an extra month of just a delayed renovation or a delayed start to a renovation. Mm-hmm. Or, if you find a problem in a house where, okay, now there needs to be some electrical done, you sort of have to stop. All the finishers, the painters, the drywallers, the trim people, the floor, they all kind of have to stop. Well, not the floor people, but you know what I mean? Like there's an order of operation to renovations. Mm-hmm. And you certainly don't finish a wall before you punch holes in it for the electrician to run wires. So yeah, contingency plan of say 3 months, 4 months before I even have any work done, Mm-hmm. So that was a big lesson. And that's what I wanted to get back to, is that you got to be really careful with private money. And I've heard through my learnings and my podcasts and all of these things that you have to get in and out very quickly, and that private money can break your deal, make or break your deal if you go over. And I just never really took it to heart what that really meant. Like it makes sense logically, but when you experience it for yourself, boy, does it ever sink in.
And like, as you said, like once you add it together and you say, for example, how much are my holding costs if I actually, let's say, last 6 months in it? And then to analyze, is that really worth it or not? Because like you said, I think, again, in your case, you probably weren't expecting it because you were really thinking BRRRR and, get those tenants in there. Right. So
yeah, like I would have been done in what it would end up being 3 to 4 months, get some tenants in and away we go. Yeah. I actually budgeted. I think I budgeted for 4 months. Mm-hmm. And so then I ended up spending an extra 10 grand in interest that I did not factor in. Mm-hmm. So, bad Andrew, but I love it, because this was by far the cheapest learning experience that I could have possibly had. I mean, it was an education that actually paid me $16,000 to learn it. It could very easily, I was going into this situation when I changed to the flip and I saw what the market was doing. And there was a bit of a depression at that time, especially in the student rental area or market. I was fully expecting to take a loss on this property. And even at a loss, I would have taken that lesson and said, okay, this was, a break even. It was going to be probably break even or a few $1,000s. And, that's great because had you not learned that, you just are open to make the mistake again and again and again until one day it really bites you in the butt. So I've been fortunate that a lot of my lessons have not come at very much of a cost. And sometimes little advice to the viewers is sometimes the best thing you can do is stick with it. If that makes any sense. So like, don't just give up and brush your hands of it and spend a lot of time thinking about how you can dig yourself out of a hole, or what different options are. Talk to different people that might have different experiences that say, oh, why don't you try this, or why don't you try that? Or, even if you just, somebody who's really good at student rentals has a really big portfolio that can absorb the hit that this one's going to take, and the rest of them will carry it. You might partner with them and give them a really nice deal, like 60% share, whatever, like just get it off your books. There's all sorts of things you can do. My very first property was a boarding house. I mean, I've told this story many times, but it was a boarding house. It was bed bugs. It was, transient tenants. It was awful. And it was the best experience of my life, because my very first property was the very worst property I ever bought. And
that's where you learn the most.
Yeah. Yeah. If you get everything right, you go through life thinking it's perfect. And then when something actually does happen,
it probably hurts a lot more than if you get it at the beginning. Because I feel like if you start with amazing things happening from the very beginning, your confidence is like way up here. And I feel like when a big problem actually comes and your confidence is all the way up there, it probably falls a lot harder, just because you're thinking like, wow, I'm so awesome. I can do this and that. And then, you realize that, wow, I didn't know this. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, the side effect of having your first 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 deals go well without any problems would be that you're going to get in deeper and buy bigger projects and take more risks, because you figure you have the Midas touch and everything. That's not everybody, but I mean, that's kind of the path that it tends to take. And we need little sort of licks on the chin once in a while to keep us humble and remind us that, this is a potentially risky business.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny though, like you get used to the numbers. Like I'll spend $100,000 faster than I'll spend $5.
It's so true. It's really true. It's funny once you get it, especially when you're outside of real estate and then now you're fully immersed. It's very true. You think initially you're just like, oh man, I don't want to spend like, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, $5 for something for going out to eat. Let's say $20 to go out to eat. And then you're like, boom, $5,000 for flooring. No issue.
Yeah. Yeah. You're being cheap eating at McDonald's, and then your realtor calls you and says he wants you to buy this $500,000 triplex. And you're like, okay.
Yeah. You're like, no issue. Although I have to say, getting more into real estate has made me actually, I feel like a bigger spender personally. Like I feel like I do, because I feel like numbers are, like you said, like now that I'm spending like in the 100Ks, let's say for renovations, I feel like I'm like, for example, like let's say maybe I'd go out to eat and only spending $20. Now I'm like, $30 is okay. Like I've started like upping things I notice in myself.
Yeah. Well, I've had the same thing happen with me too. And I think that comes from the mindset, and we both sort of subscribe to the same mentors and programs and things like that, where, the scarcity mindset versus the abundance mindset. And I definitely, post or pre 2019 was very much scarcity, where the difference in $5, like if I could get something at Walmart versus, Home Depot and save a couple of dollars. Well, now the trip from Home Depot to Walmart is the time that's going to take is worth more to me than scrutinizing over the $5. So I think that's maybe partly where you're coming from too, is just that, there's more to be made. There's money. And it's like, if I'm spending 30% of my life worrying about spending a couple bucks here and a couple bucks there. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean you should be financially irresponsible and just willy-nilly throw your money around. But
But yeah, no, it's very true. You
Be
start
frugal, but
living in
not cheap.
an abundance mindset. You're right. That is what is happening. You start living in an abundance mindset. But same thing, like it's not like frivolous spending or anything. Because even when I think of my business, and I think we've had this conversation before where I've started spending in, for example, things that I would never spend, like exactly saying scarcity mindset, where you're just like, I'm going to do everything myself. It's cheaper that way. Whereas now my mentality is all about time. I don't have the time to do everything. I have so many things going on. I need to pass it off. And like that, like I'll hire people to do things just because I don't have the time for it. And you know, my time is much more valuable in other things.
Yeah, and that's very much the entrepreneurial mindset and the realization that, you know, once you, I mean, I'm reading the E-Myth right now, which is a sort of entrepreneurial book, and it's talking about how entrepreneurs get, you know, you really like doing something or you're really good at something in your profession, your career, and then you decide you're going to go on your own. But we all kind of lose sight of the fact that those companies we worked for had accountants and marketing teams and lawyers and you know, maintenance staff and all this sort of stuff. But now that's all you.
Mm-hmm.
So you try to do it all yourself, and then you realize that you have to hire this stuff out. In fact, it's more efficient to hire out the service that somebody else is naturally good at, as opposed to you then trying to make it yourself or do it yourself. But then it also creeps over into your personal life, because now you start to value your time differently as an entrepreneur, and that you have to hire out some tasks. So now I find myself having a guy, you know, come and do my leaves in the spring and clean up the yard a bit and stuff. Like, I like gardening, but I'll let somebody else get it to the point where, you know, start the process type of thing. And, you know, hire somebody to paint my own personal house, which I never would have done before. But I know that some of our mutual mentors will definitely say, like, don't spend an afternoon painting your house. Spend the afternoon making a bunch of phone calls to people that might you know, have a deal for you. And then, you know, the profit from that deal will more than pay for the person that's painting your house, right? So
100% agree.
do the
Totally
high
agree.
value tasks, and it's high value, not to diminish any specific thing, but what your particular skill set, your value is, right? If you're
Yeah.
not skilled as a painter or a carpenter or an electrician, or, you know, somebody to go grocery shopping for you or delivery or whatever, like there's everybody needs a job, and everybody can do different things, and it's might as well let different people do those things. And I feel like my scarcity mindset kind of started from, like, I'm not going to pay anybody to do anything that I can do. But now it's more like everybody needs to succeed. And if I spend my money to help somebody else pay for their life, like, you can paint my house, I will pay you to do that, then you have money to go and shop, then, like, we all get a piece of the pie kind of thing. Money flows in all directions, everything.
100%. And I think that's also, you're just bringing on scarcity. If you try to do everything, you're basically holding on to those pennies instead of like releasing them out and getting dollars, or sending out dollars and receiving hundreds of dollars. I feel like that's exactly the definition of scarcity mindset, right? Because if you're not willing to release that money, how do you even expect to receive it? Because your hand is full holding your own money and you can't even receive other money.
Yeah. And not to mention, you just end up getting burnt out if you try to do it all yourself, right?
Yeah. And that too, yeah, 100%. So let's recap, because we've like talked about so many other things. But
Yeah,
I was
we're
like,
getting
we're
off
having
to
some
the other
such
show
good
now.
conversations. But let's recap the because I'm pretty sure you basically spoke about the tips, what your tips are for the viewer. But let's make that the recap of what you said. So what tips do you have for the
Yeah.
viewers from this experience that you've had on this property and having to pivot?
So I'd say, and I just want to hit the highlights. So I'd say that the higher level, like we talked about, controlling your contractors and this and that and the other thing. I mean, those are every job, every project you do. But the bigger thing, the bigger lessons from this were private financing, private money. Don't mess around with it. Know what you're going to do. Get in, get out, because that I learned definitely that, you know, like I said, the lender made more money on this project than I did. So that was a huge lesson. And then the importance of the multiple exit strategies, and always assume, plan for the worst, expect the best is probably I mean, it's a cliche. You've heard that 100 times, but it's so true in this case, because none of us saw COVID coming. It had such ramifications and continues to have them. You know, materials are more expensive and scarce. That causes problems in renovations. Like, you have to be able to sort of move around all these different things. So don't always just expect unicorns and rainbows. And when you're, especially to newer investors that are maybe buying their first property, I think it's really important to just, I mean, you probably don't know what the worst case scenario is, but maybe talk to somebody that might, because they might open your eyes to the potential for things. And don't be resistant to the advice, because I know I tend to be a stubborn person sometimes that, oh no, I'm going to get 500 and I'm going to rent all 5 bedrooms, and you know, so it's really good to plan for the worst, and then you're prepared if it doesn't happen. You just are more profit. And when you're analyzing properties, pad your numbers. If you can throw everything but everything and the kitchen sink at this property, and it still cash flows and there's still a return, then I mean, it's going to be awesome. You know, I estimate my interest rates higher than they actually are. My amortization periods lower than they actually are. You know, hedge for everything. So yeah, I think those are the really 2 big takeaways. Is don't mess around with private money. I mean, mess around with it, but respect it, and have the multiple exit strategies. Definitely.
100%. Thank you so much for coming on. It was awesome to hear about your project. You know, a lot of learning experiences, like your learning experiences will be also the viewers' learning experiences. And it was awesome to see that even though you had to pivot, you got 16,000 out of it. So it was, like you said, a great learning experience where you still at least made a profit, and, you know, like you got paid basically to learn something. You got 16,000 to learn something, which I think is amazing, because that's not always the case. I feel like in general, it's more like the other way around.
Yeah. And I mean, just as another thing is to anybody listening, if you break even, or even if you lose a few $1,000s, don't beat yourself up, because that is also a cheap lesson to learn. You know, you're not losing tens of thousands of dollars. If you can keep those lessons to a few $1,000s, then you're going to be better off in the future.
100% agree. Thanks so much for coming on. Thank you to everyone for watching this, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Dana. Look forward to it.
Bye.
Bye.